Hi, I'm Paul Lally, and you are watching a podcast where nostalgia comes alive. It's Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. Roll it.
Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. Join Jake and his friends on a journey through pop culture of the past, where they interview professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and so much more. Who will they be chatting with today? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. I hope you're with us. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm your host, Jake Duffenbaugh. With me today, of course, our co-hosts, Chris Bixby and Matt Bingle. How you guys doing?
Doing good. Hi,
Doing
everyone.
good.
How are you, Jake?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you for asking. Chris, what do we have for today?
Our guest for today is a director. He kind of got his start directing for kids TV and kind of transitioned into directing for various talk shows. We'll be talking about a lot of his career throughout this interview. Please welcome Dean Gordon. Dean, happy to have you here.
Thanks. Good to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you.
Yes, happy to have you here. So to kick this off, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So right now I'm director of Sherri Shepherd's talk show called Sherri. And it's a daily syndicated show, mostly on the Fox group of stations. And I've been director since it launched in a year ago, September 2022. Sherri had I was director for the last 2 years of the Wendy Williams talk show. And in the last year, we had a bunch of substitute hosts, and Sherri was one of them. And Sherri just hit it out of the park, like right away. It was as we had a bunch of different substitute hosts. It was kind of clearly an audition, and Sherri just hit it out of the park right away. And so they gave her that time slot with her own named show, with a revised set, a new set, and so she's been doing it for 2 years. She was renewed for another 2 years, I believe. Either last year she was picked up for 2 years, or David answered, so she's definitely on next year and maybe the year after. I'm not sure. Again, I forget how long the renewal is, but she's got a great following, and so that's what I've been doing up till for the last 4 years. And before that I was the associate director of Wendy Williams show. Deb Miller was the director there, and so I was the AD on that for 11 years. And I learned a whole lot about directing a talk show. Everything I know about directing a talk show really came from Deb Miller and watching her work. And before that, I was the associate director of some judge shows, Judge Hatchet, there was a raft of them, for Sony television on the East Coast. And before that was mainly that's where when I was doing puppets. I did puppets from about, I joined Bear in the Big Blue House, I think it was 1997. And I think we shot our last. Well, actually, yeah. So no, I'm sorry. I directed puppets until about 2006, when we did "It's a Big Big World" for PBS, and almost all my puppet stuff has been with Mitchell Kriegman, was the creator and executive producer and head writer and writer for Bear in the Big Blue House, the Book of Pooh, and It's a Big Big World. So that's where and then from about 2008 on, I've been doing talk shows. I did Martha Stewart for 1 year, and then ever since after that, it was Wendy Williams and then Sherri Shepherd.
Nice, nice.
Interesting. So, what was your childhood like, and how did you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island, New York, in Valley Stream. My father owned a lumber yard, so there was a house on a lumber yard. So there weren't many neighbors. There's a gas station across the street, a transmission shop across the street. And my father was in the lumber business in various ways. And then we moved to one town over, Malvern, Long Island. And you know, it was a pretty normal sort of middle class childhood. And then in my senior year, I auditioned for a part in a high school play and got the part. And that kind of got the acting bug in me. So they went to State University of New York at Buffalo. And I majored in theater, and it was a very fertile time. I worked with Gordon Rogoff, who's legendary. He just passed not too long ago, legendary theater critic,
Mhm.
and just and director. And so you know, I kind of at that point, you know, when I left, I pretty much had decided that I wanted to give show business a shot, you know. So I came to New York as hoping to act, and I just did not have the stomach for auditioning. It was just, you know, it's a rough. You really have to have a steel stomach for that, and I just didn't. I also designed some lights, you know, in Buffalo, so that was another possibility, and stage managing. So I wound up stage managing opera for about 5 years, around 77 to 82. And that's and I wasn't a particular fan of opera before I got there. A roommate of mine, Dennis Azaro, when I was at University of Buffalo, he was a complete opera freak. So I'd been exposed to it, and so I got a job at Santa Fe Opera as an apprentice scene schlepper, scene carrier. And so that kind of I won't say I got the opera bug, but I learned to appreciate opera. And then when I got to New York, I fell in with a group of people who had worked opera a bunch. And so I stage managed opera all over the country, ending my last main stage managing job was as the production stage manager of Lyric Opera of Chicago, which was it's a great opera house. And then but I was traveling all over the country, and I was trying to live a normal life. So I came back to New York, and I did a couple of gigs. I still did a couple of stage managing gigs, but then actually a woman, Abby Raven, who I had been at University of Buffalo with, she was then working for what was then Hearst ABC Entertainment. It wasn't Lifetime yet. And she said, "Do you want to stage manage television?" I said, "Sure." I mean, when you're stage managing opera, you're dealing with 10 principal singers, maybe a chorus of 60, and an orchestra of 70. And I said, I think I can deal with 5 people sitting on a set. But it is a different skill set. So I mean, there was a learning curve. And that got me into television. And after that, I really I stuck with television as a profession, while at the same time pursuing the music. I went to Manus College of Music in my 30s and got a diploma in composition. And so I tried to make a go of that. It's interesting. I mean, it's clearly I haven't made a living at it, but it's still kind of an engine that keeps me going, the possibility of writing music. And then in 2012, I joined a writing group in New York, headed by Charles Salzberg at the Jewish Community Center. And I wrote a novel which is currently in revision stage, but the first draft was finished. But anybody who knows about writing knows that the first draft is the first draft. You know, you gotta.
Yeah.
It's not done until it's done, until but that was a great thing for me. It really I felt like I was kind of in the cultural fabric of New York. Not that I was any big deal, but just that I was, kind of part of a scene of creative people, and so that was, and I did that while I was doing television, because it was at night, and the workshop was at night, and you write when you can, but it's a very disciplining. Being part of a workshop is a very disciplining. I would encourage it to everybody who may be listening, that it's because you write something, and then you submit it to 15 smart people, and you sit around the table and they say this works and that doesn't, and it's a very, very good way of getting a project, getting a good read, no pun intended, getting a good read on whether your writing works or not.
Nice.
So that's kind of, in a very small nutshell, what I've been doing.
Nice. Good to hear. So I'm kind of curious, do you remember your first directing job?
Yeah, it was terrible. It's just terrible. There was a program that Sony was doing called Mi Gente, My People. And it was it wasn't a Spanish language broadcast, but it was meant for the Latino community. And so the guests and the talent and all that were geared in that way. And it was, I don't even look at it anymore. The show itself was good. It was well produced. I can't speak much for my direction. But that was my first directing thing, I think. And then I think, every once in a while I was fortunate enough that a director I was working with would say, do you want to direct this segment? Do you want to direct? And it wouldn't, not without doing the whole show, but do you want to direct it? And I would say, sure. You always jump in. You always jump in when you can. But my first really sort of meaty direction was doing puppets with Bear in the Big Blue House. I was associate director in the first season, and then in subsequent seasons I directed quite a few of the shows.
Nice.
And the first season was directed by Hugh Martin. It was a wonderful.
Hugh, great friend of ours.
Yes.
Yeah. He's an amazing director.
Yes.
And so I was an associate director, but he doesn't need a strong associate director. He didn't want me to. He didn't particularly want me to ready shots a whole lot. So I said, just shut up and watch him work, and just watch and learn. And I would ask him questions about why you're doing this, why are you doing that, and so I learned a ton. I learned a ton from Hugh, and he's really just first-rate director, and puppets are a lot of ways to do puppets. But Bear in the Big Blue House was a particularly interesting thing. You know, on Sesame Street, everything's on ground level, you know, and they're running around on rollies again, I haven't done Sesame in years and years. But basically, you know, your puppeteers are on the floor and they're, you know, they're puppeteering like this, unless they're behind a counter, you know. But Bear in the Big Blue House, you had a walk around puppet who was Bear, right? So he had to have a floor to stand on. But everybody else was you know, a hand puppet. And if you've heard this before, just from other people, just stop me. So the whole set, the entire set, which we shot in a couple of places, California Astoria. The whole set was built 3 feet off the concrete, you know, cement floor of the studio, and it was all, you know, covered in. The camera alley was covered in very smooth masonite, so we could do trucking shots and that kind of thing. But it was the set that the puppeteers puppeteered on. And it wrapped around, the set wrapped around the whole studio from different rooms and, you know, of Bear's house. But within those sets were, I think they were 3 by 3 foot, either 3 by 3 or 4 by 4 removable pieces of floor, so that Bear could be standing in one place, and right next to him might be a section of floor that had been removed, so that the puppeteers could stand and, you know, and puppeteer at a much more comfortable way than, you know, rolling around on rollies. Sometimes we did that, but otherwise it was we would remove sections of floor so that puppeteers could stand and you know, puppeteer, you know, kind of standing up without crouching down, you know. And it was a great bunch of people.
Oh
Just a
yeah,
wonderful-
it's such a wonderful show.
It was a great show, and first of all, you know, I always said that puppeteering with that group of people and with that quality of puppeteer, it was like driving a Cadillac, you know. And that was my I was lucky enough that was my first experience. It was like, you know, the first experience is the best. And you know, they all had enough experience for me to know that if anybody could do it, they could do it. And if they said it couldn't be done, I could trust that it couldn't be done. You know, go to plan B, figure something else out. But it was that kind of thing that I knew that if I was asking them to do something, they would move heaven and earth to make it happen. Once you'd say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. And if I'm not doing it right, let me know. And they would, and they say, well, if you could get rid of that piece of floor, somebody else can get back here and stack, you know, the puppets could be stacked because you want. We shot in 4:3. You know, Bear was in 4:3. We weren't in 16:9 yet. And so you need, and plus there was safety. You had to keep them in picture safety. So, you know, a lot of times you would want to kind of, you know, kind of stack the puppets one behind another, or, you know, next to each other. Kind of. But it was and the writing, and Andy Yerkes was head writer.
Oh
The
yeah,
writing
Andy.
on that show,
Andy, yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Great guy too.
And he was, I mean, that show was great. You know, the writing was, and it's in terms of children's television, Bear in the Big Blue House still is my, it's got my, it will always have my heart. And Disney is now streaming it.
Yes,
you know.
that's right. It's on Disney Plus, which
Yes,
is
it's on
really
Disney
So
Plus.
happy.
which is really cool because I mean Bear hasn't been on the air in many years now.
Almost
So
almost 20
it's great that
years.
it's available to stream for not just us who grew up with it, but now for a new generation of kids who've
Yeah,
never
Absolutely.
grown
my
up with the show.
granddaughter watches it. You know, she particularly likes the
Oh,
very beginning when he comes, you know, sticks his head and kind of sniffs, and then the
Mhm.
doors open up. You know, we had that front door, for anybody who knows Bear in the Big Blue House, we'd always come through the front door, and it would split, you know, so the camera would move in and the door would split as if we were the visitor coming into the house.
Nice.
So it was, you know, but it was a great experience.
Nice.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Since you kind of already touched base about, you know, how you kind of got to be first involved in the show, I'm kind of curious, do you have any favorite episodes of Bear that you got to direct?
Um, well, there was one that had a lot of heart. I felt there was one about grandparents.
Oh yeah,
Um, you know,
Right.
and
Mhm.
it was just, you know, at the end they have to, the parents are leaving, and and I think it was this episode where it was Pip and Pop, the
Mhm.
otters, you know. Um, and we rehearsed the scene, and they were saying goodbye to the grandparents, and they were going to cry at the end, you know. And I said, so we rehearsed it once, and I said, okay, guys, you know what I'm going for, and this is another situation where I just I asked them what I told them what I was going for, and they pulled it off. And I mean, it's a sock puppet, you know, pretty much, you know, Pip and Pop are pretty basic puppets. But I said, you know, the way kids, um, when they're about to cry but don't want to cry, you know, the way they try to hold it in and they try to put on a brave face, you know, and then when they can't hold it, they go, oh, you know, they just sort of
Yeah.
do it, you know, they're going, yeah, everything's okay. Yeah. And then they lose it, you know. I said, can it play the scene like that? And it was written where there was kind of a build-up, you know. And I don't know how the hell they did it, but they did it. Peter Linz and Tyler Bunch. Um,
Two great guys.
two
Oh my gosh, they really
Amazing.
are.
unbelievable guys,
So
unbelievable
talented
puppeteers,
too. Yeah.
Yes.
incredible, you know. Tyler, you'll see, I saw Tyler on I think it was a Law and Order where he played some sleazy guy, you know,
Yeah, that's right.
you know,
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
he wasn't the killer, but it was, you know, I think he was a suspect. Um, but he does, and he at the time he was also or he had been doing Gilbert and Sullivan. He's got a great voice. Um, he does impressions, and he's just this multi-talented guy, you know. And an excellent director in his own right, you know. Uh, yeah, so it was working with those guys. It was really, like I said, it really was like driving a Cadillac, and you get spoiled. You get spoiled, you know.
Yeah.
And so I guess that was one of my favorite episodes. I also directed uh, Between the Lions, where
Yes.
Beautiful
where
Love
I
that
was
show too.
I was sharing directing duties with Lisa Simon,
Oh, rest in
uh,
peace.
who rest in peace,
Yes.
great director, wonderful woman, um, who I also learned a lot from. Um, and you know, every kid show has a pirate episode, and so I had the pirate episode, and it
Oh
was this
yeah.
really big set, and I was able to, like, you know, use the jib to kind of swing down, and the set and the sails unfurled and all that stuff, and that was fun.
And talk about Peter Linz. He did a wonderful job on that show as well as Theo.
Theo, yeah, and
Yeah,
Yes,
Mr.
Theo on that show.
Bunny.
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. Oh, I know. On that show, um, uh, it was about, there was a song that they sang where they were looking up at the stars,
Oh yeah, the Mighty Star
Mighty
Lion.
Star Lion.
Lion.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Love that episode too.
That is
I listen.
a
I listened
beautiful
Such a
to
wonderful
that.
song.
Yes.
Oh my God, what a great song. And I was just kind of laying on the floor one point, and I was because I had been assigned to direct it. And I just kind of said, "Oh, okay, I think I know how I want to do this." I kind of sat up in the bowl. And first of all, it was a beautiful song. I really wanted to do it justice.
Oh yeah.
And of all the songs I did, and every show had at least one song, and sometimes more. But of all the songs I did, I think that was my favorite. There was something magical about that. And Jen Barnhart.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Another
Jen.
talent.
Love
Yeah.
Jen.
Love Jen
Puppeteer,
so
actor,
much.
singer. She's
Yeah, she
wonderful.
does it
Goodness.
all.
Yeah.
Anthony Asbury was one of the kid
Yep.
puppets.
Anthony, yeah.
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 Lionel.
And Lionel. Well, you guys have better memory than I. But it was but that song, and I don't know how, I don't know, I guess we did a green screen or something with some set pieces in front of it. But it was really, and I think that's what I think at the end I wanted to come up and as if we're seeing them from the stars,
Mhm.
and we did it. It was that for me was a really kind of magical thing.
Yeah,
And
and props to the music people on that show. I don't know if you got to know them well, but Paul Jacobs and Sarah Durkee, they wrote a lot of songs for that show. They did such a
right,
great job.
great job, and while I was talking about Bear in the Big Blue House, I mean, Noel McNeil,
Yeah.
holy
No.
cow.
Mhm.
Holy cow. I mean, he was amazing. The way he puppeteered in that, and that no matter if there was a fan in there, the studio was air conditioned, but that thing was wearing like 5 winter coats, and so we really had to, and I mean, luckily the top came off and on easily. But he did incredible work of, looking down, um, he's looking down, and his hands were in the head running the mix for the eyes and stuff. But he was looking down at a monitor, and we could have reversed because, when you look, if you're on the set and the camera is shooting you, if you move this way, it looks that, like you're going that way.
Yeah.
And we could have flipped it in the switcher to make it, and I've tried that. They let me try the costume on and work it, which every director should do, by the way. So they know what they're up against. And it's, it's tough. And, sometimes we had different arm arrangements. Sometimes there was, Jim Krupa would be his right arm, which meant he had to hide behind. We had to shoot to make sure we didn't see Jim. But sometimes there was like a little hook in the wrist
Mhm.
that went through a little. So it was attached to the wrist, and it went through a little eye, right? That was over. So it was a fish line that went from here through here to this. So depending on what Noel wanted to do, it could either be rigged like that, or one arm could be just kind of stabilized in a position. But he, and the puppet team on that show was also actually the puppet team on all the shows that I've worked on. Talk about driving a Cadillac. I mean, they take incredible pride in what they do. Many of them had, come from Sesame and that background. They take incredible pride in what they do. And they're really they're just a cream of the crop, just the top of the line in what they do.
Absolutely.
Michelle Hickey is somebody that is the one named Larry McLean. So so it was so that was a great experience. I'm running off at the mouth. Go ahead. Ask questions if you want.
No worries.
No worries at all.
Worries at all. No worries. So aside from directing the show itself, you also got to direct the live show Surprise Party, which eventually became a home video in and of
Yeah, the Bear
itself.
Live show. Yeah.
Yeah, we shot that in Toronto. It wasn't live. It was live in front of an audience, but it wasn't live.
Right.
Right. We shot that in Toronto. And that was a whole different kettle of worms. I don't remember tons about that. But I do remember we shot it. I think we shot two or three episodes, and the camera folks we had were mainly sports people, because I think in town, like I think at the time we were in town, like the Rolling Stones were in town, and they got a lot of camera guys. So we got a lot of guys who were fantastic at hockey and basketball, but they weren't used to shot numbers and stuff like that, But they, I give them credit. They adapted. And like I say, that was a long time ago. I don't remember a lot about that. But it was a good group of puppeteers and performers, who performed in the show.
Yeah, and fun fact, when I was 3, when the show went to Massachusetts, I actually got to see it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
I think
Yeah,
somewhere in storage we still have like the original tickets.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
that's
was
awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that was and then we, I don't know if you were going to get to Big World, or Book of Pooh, because that was Boone Raku puppets.
Yeah.
And that was, I think I remember Mitchell talking about it, Mitchell Kriegman. And that was, for Disney. And I think the idea of Boone Raku puppets for that, like emanated from the fact that Tigger has to jump. Tigger's got to jump.
Yeah.
And so once you start getting into that, and my wife Robin Seiden was the producer on that also.
Yes.
Once you get into the Boone Raku, that's a whole different kettle of worms.
Oh yeah, it was very interesting
yeah.
how that show was made, because each character took, all the puppeteers were dressed in these green screen suits, and each character kind of took like 3 people to puppeteer.
And then doing that walk.
Yeah, like someone doing the head, someone doing like the legs and the arms. It was
Right.
very interesting how that show was made.
I mean, the feet are a thankless job. Let me tell you something, because Eric
Engelhart.
If anybody else tries to come in and do feet,
he did that for Pooh. I think he did that for Pooh
or something.
Some of the Peter.
Yes. And it's a thankless job, because nobody knows nobody notices it unless you do it bad, and it's really hard. And with Boone or Coo, the puppeteers' bodies are entangled with each other. I mean, talk about trying to figure out body positions. It made Bear in the Big Blue House, where people are kind of standing and doing it, relatively humane. But Boone or Coo, you are up in people's armpits, and it's like and you know, um, we shot it. So the um, so it was. No, I know Big World was blue screen.
Yeah, because some of the
Yeah, it
characters
was.
in that show were green, so they kind of can do
Right,
green screen. Yeah.
right. But Book of Pooh was green screen, and so they had these outfits with glass beads embedded in them, and then we had a lens light, right, which was green, and it would shoot out, and the glass beads would reflect it back to the camera so that it would key out. But the problem was that those outfits, you couldn't wash them or dry clean them very much because they would lose the glass beads and they would lose their key ability. So I mean, they were spray. We were putting vodka in spray bottles and just trying to get rid of the odor. Um, and it was and plus hoods. So you have full body suits and hoods crammed in together. That was very tough. That was very tough. But again, um, and you always you're under a time. There's always a time issue. You got to shoot this stuff as. Although I mean, Bear and Book of Pooh, I seem to remember being pretty humane in terms of schedule. I could be remembering it fondly, but it was kind of a humane schedule. Um, Big World was, we had to really drive. We really had to drive. It was, um, there was a writer strike uh, for part of the time we were there. Um, and, just be given the kind of scripts we had, um, uh, setups, it's all about the number of setups you have. Once you're in a setup, shooting it usually doesn't take a lot of time. But
Mhm.
if a script has like 5 or 6 setups, and it was like platforming, and you were moving platforming, and this, it was big, and it was a lot of stuff to deal with. That I said, I went to the writers and to Mitchell, and Mitchell said, okay, you're the senior director on this. You don't have to come to me for approval. I'm empowering you. You're the main guy. Um, and uh, and so and it was shooting in the Hamptons. I lived in Jersey. I would go out to the Hamptons Monday, Sunday night through, and come home Friday night. And it was by the end of it, I said, guys, I said to the writers and producers, I said, it's all about the setups. And so after that, it became kind of dialogue heavy, because once we were in a setup, we would have scenes that would go on for 5 or 6 minutes, which weren't the most interesting things, but it was something that you could knock out faster, you know, because we were just, it was like it was kind of like a movie set. How many pages did you do today? Which is the first time actually I had come across that. It was like, okay, well, I thought we had done pretty well by doing 5 pages. And they said, yeah, we really need to boost that a little bit. There were some days where we did 9.5 pages, but again, I had a great crew, set crew and puppetry crew. So
Nice.
it was that was in terms of being in charge of something, that was really that I would say maybe that was kind of where I came into my own in terms of being in charge of. Now Mitchell, obviously the executive producer, if I had a question, I went to him. But in terms of a kind of a day-to-day operation, being the senior director on it, and also on Big World, Tyler Bunch directed some of those episodes. Tim Lagasse directed
Tim,
some. Yeah,
great guy.
yeah. And so it was
And Pierre,
it was a
Snook,
great
and
experience
Oko.
personally,
Yeah.
for in terms of growth.
Yeah. Both wonderful shows.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, absolutely. So, kind of going a little bit back, actually. So, early on in your career, you directed for the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss. What was that like?
Right. That might have been my first puppeteering thing. And the main director on that was David.
Gumpel?
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he really helped me. He was terrific, and I think I directed one episode of that, and there was one scene. There was one scene where I had to where there was like a million puppets, and the shot was just too spread out. It was a lousy shot, you know. And so luckily I had a lunch hour, so I went to the set, and I just, so I just sat there and tried to, and I think I figured it out over a lunch hour. But David was always very generous and very helpful in help getting me out of a jam, and you know, another case of watching somebody work who's done a bunch of this. How do they do it? Stack them up, kicking over each other's shoulders, and this and that. But Marty Robinson was,
Marty, yes.
Good friend of ours.
yeah, he was the main character in that. And we did some nice tracking shots. I guess we did it with a jib. I don't know. There were no Steadicams, certainly. But I guess we did it with a jib or something like that. And you just had to be, if somebody said heads, if we saw a head, we would have to do the shot again. And they do that on, you're doing Sesame or something like that. Somebody said heads. Sometimes you can blow it up a little bit. If it's just a little bit, you can blow it up. But Marty was pretty amazing in that show too. But yeah, David Gumpel was. Yeah, David Gumpel. I did another thing with David, but it wasn't a puppet show. Was it like a kids dancing show that we shot in Florida?
Animal Jam?
Yeah. Yes, Animal Jam.
I love that show too.
I think that David did the vast majority of episodes, and I think I did one or two. I think I did a couple. I don't know. I also did a couple of, like, 4 episodes. I think it was 4 of Sid the Science Kid.
Oh yeah.
You guys familiar with that?
Yes.
Of course,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
It's a good show.
Wow.
Great show.
Digital puppetry, whole different.
Oh my
Yeah.
God!
Completely
Talk about a whole different kettle of fish. That was wrapping my brain around. I went out there for about a week just to observe, and I needed every minute of that. because it was all about proportion. And so like if there was a first of all, it was mocap, motion capture. And there was like if there was an adult and a child, it's supposed to be in the same room. The adult might be on one end of the studio in a room that was proportioned to him or her, and the child might be in a room on the other end of the studio proportion. And you had to, like, because it was a lot of CG and all this stuff, you had to decide, okay, Sid's running in with a rubber ball. Okay, which hand is it going to be in? You had to get like, you had to be super prepped for that, So a lot of that was prep, and the computer stuff every once in a while would just kind of go south, and you'd lose hours. You'd lose hours on it. But in terms of to this day, that's one of the most challenging, or perhaps the most challenging directing gigs that I've had, because it was a whole different kettle of fish. And I mean, you really had to come in prepped and locked down. They could make some last minute changes, but it really had to be locked down, because it was just because all the CG stuff had to be prepped ahead of time.
Mhm.
That's why we had to know what hand Sid was carrying something, or a pot and a pan. We're going to carry it over here and set it down, and so the puppeteers were kind of, I recall they were kind of off to the side, and I don't remember exactly the setup, but I know a lot of the puppeteers were sort of, kind of on the perimeter of the studio.
Yeah, and they're doing like kind of a little machines where they can doing the face of the
Yeah,
character.
Motion capture.
Yeah,
Yeah,
motion capture.
Motion capture,
exactly.
Yeah,
That's what I meant.
yeah. Yeah, my last day there, it was not, it did not go well. Because I lost, I mean, it was going to be a challenging episode anyway, and then I lost 3 hours in the morning where the computer just crapped out or wasn't working. And
Oh boy.
yeah, and by the end of the day, they were saying, yeah, Dean, and I had to go back to my other job. I was doing the court shows at that time. And so I don't think I've worked for Henson since then. But I gotta say, in fairness to me, it was, I lost about 3 hours, I think, on a challenging episode anyway. So
Interesting.
but aside from that, it was really interesting.
Yeah,
It was
really good show
really
too.
interesting. Yeah, it was a good show, and it was really
Drew
interesting.
Massey,
Yeah.
doing Sid, and then Alice, and Victor Yared, and all those puppeteers. I said, oh
Right.
my gosh.
Right, Victor. Yes, I remember. Yes, Victor Yared.
Like Victor.
So they were. It was a super challenging. Really got my brain working. And listen, if I could work puppets again, I would do it in a heartbeat. I miss that world so much, and I love those people so much, and I really miss that world like crazy. I mean,
Oh yeah.
the talk show world has been very good to me, and I'm happy I do it. I enjoy doing it. I do a live show, 3 times a week. And that keeps you on your toes. It keeps you sharp. If you make a mistake, it's on its way to Jupiter, But I wish I could live in both worlds,
Yeah.
Scott Preston does. Scott Preston's he directed Rachel for ages, and he does Sesame, and so he definitely lives in both worlds, as does Ken Diego.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, he's been there a
Okay.
long time.
Yeah, so I just worked with him last night, live in HD at the Met. So he was associate director
Oh,
for
wow.
Barry Halverson,
Oh,
and
cool.
then
Nice.
and then the next day he'll go and direct at Sesame Street. So he's been very successful in keeping his feet in both worlds, for which I have tremendous respect. And
Nice.
you know,
Nice. So you worked as an associate director for the Carmen San Diego game show.
yeah.
What was that? What was that like getting to work on
So
that?
so actually, I was a stage manager on Where in the World is Carmen San Diego. And so that was great. It was a great bunch of people. I I was a stage manager, and Rockapella was the musical talent,
Ah, yes.
as you know.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so one thing I remember about that, well, a couple of things. The police chief was Lynn. Help me here.
Lynn
Lynn
Thigpen?
Lynn Thigpen, who
Lynn
of
Thigpen.
course later went on to voice Luna.
Luna.
Yeah.
Right.
So rest in peace.
Yes, rest in peace. Yeah.
Bless her soul.
Rest in peace. Too soon. She
Yes.
passed too soon. Way too soon.
Mhm.
But so I had submitted a theme song for coming off my music composing stuff. I had submitted a theme song for the Carmen San Diego, right? For Where in the World is Carmen San Diego. It didn't get accepted. Rockapella's theme, Rockapella, I think they wrote the theme song and sang it, performed it. But over the course of the season, I got to know the guys, the four guys from Rockapella, and I said, "Listen, guys, can I ask you to record this song for me, right?" Because I think I knew that Rockapella was going to be the musical talent, and so I think I wrote the song with that in mind. And so they said, yeah. So there was I forget the name of the studio, but it was in Manhattan Plaza on 10th Avenue and 43rd Street. It was in the basement. And so I rented the studio out for 2 or 3 hours, and they came and they worked out the harmonies. They worked out little vocal things that I had never thought of, and that became part of my reel. And it was
Oh, nice.
so there was very generous, and for no money. They did it gratis. And that was very generous of them to do. Very generous. And that's one of my favorite pieces in my catalog. But that was, I don't remember tons about shooting it. I think we had an audience of kids. And one time my 9th grade English teacher showed up with a bunch of kids, and I introduced myself. And by that, I'd been out of her class for like 30 years or something like that. But it was a fun show to shoot. And then Where in Time, then I was the associate director on Where in Time is Carmen San Diego. And that was a tough one to be associate director on, because we were doing stuff like, and Kevin, the main star of the show, his first name was Kevin. I can't remember his last name. And so he was sort of, the captain. He was like the main character. And so there were times when he had to kind of talk to himself in a monitor or something. I forget the exact things, but we had to pre-record him, then play him back through a monitor, and he had to time his live dialogue with the tape dialogue. and it was it was it was it was tough. It was, but again, it was one thing about
Oh, I'm Kevin Shinek.
Shinnick, yes, Kevin Shinnick, yeah. Um, and so that was a very challenging show, just in terms of tape and again, we're talking about tape. We're not talking about anything digital. And just kind of coordinating that stuff, figuring out how to do it, was a real challenge. I'd be curious to see. I don't know. Are these things available like on YouTube? Can you still
Yeah,
see this stuff on
yeah, I
YouTube?
think most
Yeah.
of the episodes of the Carmen Sandiego shows, I think they're on YouTube. Some
Yeah.
of them,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, must have been.
yeah.
It was a good show, and I got to tell
Oh
you,
yeah.
being in the puppet world, because it was always an educational component in one way or another to what we did. Sometimes it was emotional education. I mean, Bear in the Big Blue House was not. It wasn't big about learning numbers and letters. I mean, I think there was some of that, but it was really, that show had so much heart. It had more heart than anything I've done, I think. And I think that's what I really loved about it. Uh, and so, my talk show experience, it's been fun. It's kept me sharp. But I do look back very fondly of the days of my puppet stuff, because I miss it. It's the talk show world is great. Like I say, it's been very good to me. Kept me in the house for for all these years. But in terms of knowing that you're making an impact on kids, because it's funny, because now when my daughter, who's in her early 30s, when she tells people that her father directed Bear in the Big Blue House, oh really? Well, their eyes light up, or the Book of Pooh, their eyes light
Oh,
up,
that's
because
great.
those kids are now in their 30s and they remember that stuff so fondly, because it
That's
really meant
awesome.
something to them. So I'm in terms of anything I've contributed to the world, I think it's probably more on the puppet side of things. Not to say that I'm embarrassed or don't take pride in what I've done in the talk show world, but in terms of contributing something to kids, it's a really good feeling to be able to contribute something to kids.
Nice.
Absolutely. So another Disney series you directed was Out of the Box. What was it kind of getting to work along with the hosts Tony and Vivian like?
Right. So I think I directed either 2 or 4 episodes of that. Boy, you're bringing up stuff that I had forgotten that I had done. My wife, Robin Side, also produced that show. And Simon was the last name, sorry, was the executive producer. Maybe somebody can do a quick Google. And we became friends with. And that show was really kind of hard for me. I really had to watch a bunch of episodes for me to wrap my brain around what exactly it was, and yeah, Tony and Vivian were the total pros, and excellent performers. And we had kid performers, and so I really it was I in terms of shooting, I would say that just kind of, this sounds stupid, but it's never stopped me before. That it just kind of wrapping my brain around what the show was about. Was because it was I don't know how to describe it, but it was kind of a melange of things. And I don't say that in a bad way, but I kind of remember, that's how I remember it being. That just kind of wrapping my brain around, I could shoot the individual segments, but you also want to just get the idea of the show. By the time I directed it, after watching 3 or 4 episodes, I said, okay, now I get it. But it was fun shooting. Because we were shooting at Kaufman Astoria. I think my wife was working on Out of the Box while I was shooting Bear in the Big Blue House, and in different studios in the same building. And there was an area between the 2 buildings that we called the DMZ, so we would kind of the performers run into different people from the 2 shows at different times. It was a really good facility. But that's in terms of I don't remember a whole. I mean, I kind of remember there was kind of a mystery thing or a detective where I remember kind of a kid in a trench coat and with a hat and a spyglass and magnifying glass, trying to figure out a mystery. And you had to, actually, directing children, obviously you have to make them feel comfortable. You have to make them feel at home. You just kind of, it's no problem. We'll do it again. There's a flood one, no problem. We'll do it again. Don't worry about it. And sometimes you just have to, if somebody's, and actually I've run into this with adults, where if they're just having trouble with lines, you just have to just do more cutting. You just have to, take their lines kind of one at a time and take them as singles, and then cut to a 2-shot when the other people are talking, and then cut to a single of them. So there are some kind of practical things, but again, like I say, I've run into that with adults as well as child performers, But it was a good show. It was a really kind of an original show, out of the box. Interesting concept.
Yeah,
definitely. So you also got to direct, as we mentioned briefly earlier, you got to direct a season of Sesame Street. What was directing that like?
Yeah, actually, you're being very kind, but I directed 1 episode.
Oh, really?
I AD'd a couple of episodes, and I AD'd several home videos.
Okay.
Kevin Clash. I was
Kevin, yeah.
AD for Kevin Clash, who was great. I really
love
treasure.
Kevin.
Yeah, I treasure having worked with him. Because he's an immensely talented guy. But I AD'd for him on a bunch of home videos. I directed 1 episode of Sesame Street, which somehow there was like a 50th anniversary book or something like that, and my episode wound up, and there were pictures of me directing and consulting with the writer and direct. It's like
that's great.
there were, yeah, but I mean, I'm thrilled that it was there, but in terms of whether I deserve to be in the 50th anniversary book, I don't. It's I have to. I don't know. There were a lot of people who did tons and tons more work than I did. But directing Sesame Street is really interesting. again, an awful lot of prep going into it. And actually, I think that was the year I directed. I think maybe it was the first year that Abby,
Abacadabby.
Yeah.
Abby Kadabi was
Yeah,
a
Leslie Claire
character.
Rudolph. Oh my
Yes,
gosh, I love Leslie so much.
who was, oh my God, how
You want to talk
wonderful.
about talented?
Yeah.
Oh, she does everything.
Yes.
She does everything.
Puppeteer, director, writer, just producer,
Singer.
so much. Yeah,
Singer.
I mean, she does live nightclub acts,
Yeah.
which she did at the time. But on pre-pro on Sesame Street, on the production meeting, this is how I recall it. You go in and there's a conference table with it seems like there are 100 people at this conference table. There aren't, but there's probably 15 or 20 people. And it can be, it's like, talk about being prepared. They really want answers. And so you go through the script scene by scene, and this is what I'm thinking about doing this, and you would solicit their advice. But and then when you're actually shooting, again, it was my first show, and I'd been doing it. I was directing people who had been doing it for 35 years or more. I don't forget what year I actually directed it. But you do so. But that's a font of wisdom that is at your disposal. In terms of how to stage something, and again, my I had some child actors in mind, and so it was, and you got to get it done. It was, I think, I had to get that episode done. And as a matter of fact, there was a Christmas party that night. So around 3:00, you lose a portion of the set because they're setting up catering tables, over there, so you had to shoot over here. So you had to plan your day to, like after 3:00, forget about shooting over there. But and again, I remember working with Harold Spinney. Everybody, there was so much respect and deference earned, greatly earned to Carol. It's like, okay, this is the way we do it. You roll tape, you roll to record, you roll tape, then you put the top on Big Bird, and then you do the scene, and so like you just made sure he was in that outfit as little as possible, and also, I'm and just going back to Bear, and I still do this on talk shows too. I direct from the floor, meaning that, like with Bear in the Big Blue House, I had to like walk. When it came to blocking, they gave me a foam head, that was about Bear size. And so
Right.
I would walk the set. I go, okay, I'm going to go behind. He goes behind the counter, and I'm kind of working out his blocking. I mean, I had it on paper, but I wanted, okay, this is what I think goes. And Noel would watch me, and walk over here, look around, and he sees Tutter down there, and Tutter pops up, and and by the way, some of the off-camera stuff that Tutter would and all the characters would come up with were just, I would laugh so hard I couldn't catch my breath. They were just, just hysterical. But it's funny because I still do that in talk shows. If we're doing a game or something like that, I'll stand in and I'll ask the technical director to put up a split of the cameras over on the side monitor so I can see them. And so, I'll if it's two contestants, I'll be one of the contestants. So I say, hey, Jimmy, can you get this? And, Pat, if you frame it out like this, or Rambo like this, and Ellie. So I think that comes from, it comes from maybe starting out as acting,
Mm-hmm.
And because I kind of have to be, that's how I kind of feel it. I mean, look, there's plenty of things where they say we're going to do this game, and and I figure, okay, it's very technical, and somebody's going to get the over the shoulder, and somebody gets a waist, and somebody gets a close up, and somebody gets a 3-shot, and so forth. But in terms of just kind of getting the feel of the scene, I have to be out there, And actually sometimes they had a roll around with all the camera monitors. And sometimes I would call it from the floor very quietly. And Ted May, also rest his soul, who I AD'd for. Now Ted directed God knows how many episodes of Sesame Street, right? And so Ted, and he would come in prepared. I mean, he knew generally how he was going to do it, He knew generally how he was going to do it. He was another one who didn't want me to ready cameras. He didn't need a strong AD at all. But he would watch him do the scene, right? He would watch him rehearse the scene. And then he would mark a script, camera 3, camera 1, camera 2. And then he would hold, because he was directing from the floor. I would stay in the control room. And then he would hold his script up in front of the camera while he was on headset. He'd say, okay, I'm going to go to 2 here, then 1, then 3, back to 2 after this line, hold the 2-shot, and then, and he was kind of, I would say he was doing it on the fly, but not really. I mean, he prepped. He knew what he was doing, but, he just wanted to, he also was enough in command of how these things work, that he wanted to get the feel of the scene and how the performers were performing it before he absolutely decided how he was going to cut camera. I forget what your original question was, but because I know I've been all over the place.
Just kind of overall, like what was working on Sesame Street like?
Oh yeah, right, Sesame Street. Yeah, so that was kind of it was. I'm so glad I got a chance. And like I say, I AD'd more than I directed, but I'm glad I did get a chance to direct one episode there. But working with Ted, and I think I probably AD'd some for Lisa Simon. Although I really mostly worked with Lisa on Between the Lines. That's
Right.
really very good, because I think I AD'd for her, and I think I AD'd for her, and then I got to direct some episodes.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So, and moving on from your work directing for children, of course, we've talked a lot about it throughout this interview. Getting to direct, judge shows and talk shows and stuff like that. So, I want to start off by asking, like, what was the transition kind of like from, directing children's shows for so many years to now directing, judge shows and talk shows? What was that transition like?
It was actually pretty easy. An interesting thing, in terms of the first main thing I associate directed. I was a stage. I don't know if you guys even know about this woman, Dr. Ruth Westheimer,
Oh
the
yeah.
sex therapist.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was her stage manager in the 80s, right? And
Oh wow.
we loved each other. We had a great time on set. And then I wanted to be associate director. And Michael Bernhardt was the director, and he graciously allowed me to do that. But it was tough in terms of getting a job, in terms of getting the trust of the people I needed to get. It was harder to go from stage managing to ADing than from ADing to directing, because once you're ADing, the producers are sitting right behind you. They're seeing you in the control room. You're having interaction with them. They know that they can trust you or not trust you, but fortunately for me, they could trust me. Um, uh, and it was harder the transition from stage in terms of getting jobs. It was tougher going from stage manager to AD than it was from ADing to directing. You know, and so in terms of directing talk shows, you know, I didn't really direct talk shows until I had AD'd for like 11, 12 years on a talk show. Like I say, it was always with Deb Miller. I no, I AD'd on the judge shows. I don't know if I directed any of them. But the Bahman Samian was the director I worked with most of the time. Excellent director. He works news, you know, New York One now, but he was like senior director for Fox News. So making the transition from stage manager to AD was tougher than making from AD to director. And then in terms of talk shows, I I was Deb Miller's AD on one season of Martha Stewart, and then 11 seasons of Wendy Williams. So that's the best training ground imaginable. You know, you've seen everything happen, including Wendy Williams fainting live on a live
Oh
broadcast.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And how you handle that. She was quick enough to know Fade to Black. Which sounds like, oh, of course, but it's not obvious at the moment, you know, but she knew to do that. So much of what I learned was watching Deb Miller, ADing for her, counting music. You know, we had a lot of music acts, and she would do the shots, and I would count her into the shots. And her father was Walter Miller, who was legendary director, directed huge specials, the Grammys, the Tonys, the Country Music Awards, just, you know. And they have a way of doing things, and Deb inherited that way of doing it, and it's a very good and efficient way. They have a way of doing things, and then that she then passed on to me, and I continue to do it that way. And sometimes, you know, there were times when she would call it hoods up. She would wear a hoodie sweater. And hoods up, it was just going to be because we didn't know what a music act was going to do. And so she would just, and this is live TV. She was just winging it on live TV. So being her AD was the best possible training a human being could have in terms of directing a talk show. And so and actually the only reason she left was because of COVID. She couldn't really be in a control room, so they asked me to take over the show. But otherwise, she would have kept on doing it. So I had great training, which allowed me to step into it pretty seamlessly. You know, and that said, there's a huge difference between ADing and directing. It just is. You're calling several hundred shots on a talk show between, audience shots and then interviews and then games and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a craft. It's a craft that you learn how to do. some people do it better than others. But it's, Deb Milley told me it's about listening. You gotta listen to every word that is being said. And you're looking at 5 cameras. And the last camera you should be looking at is the one you're on. You should be looking, what's next? What's next? What's next? Because if you're watching TV, if you're watching the camera you're on, you're probably going to be late for the next shot. So it's and even as much directing as I've done, to this day, I still have to force myself to not look at the shot I'm on, to look at the other cameras, to see what's next. Because you might be on a normal guest interview, you're on a 2 shot, right? The host asks a question, and then you cut to a single for the answer, right? Well, okay, so you're on that single, fine, and you're watching that single, but then you should be looking at the 2 shot or the single of the host to see if they're going to interrupt and jump in, and if that catches them by surprise, you're going to be late. You really need to be, and so that's unscripted. Puppet shows, you don't have to really worry about that because that's scripted. Those are a different set of challenges. Those are very logistical and a lot of physical challenges in terms of how do you shoot this and all that. But in terms of unscripted, you really have to be watching, listening, and that's what Deb Milley taught me that lesson, and I've tried to put it to good use since then. I think I do okay, but that's for others to judge, not me.
Nice. So as we kind of talked about, what you're doing now with the Sherri show, as we're about to wrap up, the last question that Matt's about to ask is a question we ask all of our guests at the end. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Chris. If you didn't catch it at the beginning, this podcast is called Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. When you think of nostalgia, what do you think of? Or in your own words, how do you define the word nostalgia?
I think of it, defining it. I think of a kind of a pleasurable feeling thinking about times gone by. Nostalgia is often, kind of a wasted emotion. I mean, it's okay to remember things as they were, but it's like when I hear people waxing nostalgic about stuff that I've lived through, it's like, yeah, it was 50 years ago, and it was okay, but it was like, I can't say that I'm longing for those days again. There are some of those days I'm longing for, but it's not. But and I think fondly about things in the past, but I really try to stay young at heart and in mind, and one of the ways you do that is not it's living in the present and not living in the past. So I'm fine about thinking of things in the past, but I really think about the present and the future. So because it's it was everybody.
I'm leaving for a while.
Okay. So it's that's how I feel about nostalgia. It's fine. And there were simpler times, and sometimes there were better times in some respects of living. no question about it. But this is where we are now. This is where you're at. Live your life now.
Absolutely.
There was a great book, but I forget the author's name. The book is called Low Life, and it's about New York, like from about the 1840s to the 1920s, when New York really burgeoned and came into its own.
Interesting.
And he has a very succinct. Damn, I wish I could find that. He has in it. He has a very succinct and accurate way of talking about nostalgia and the good old days. Where people imagine they were simpler times, even though they weren't really necessarily simpler times at all. People were, they had fewer modern conveniences. Communication was harder. Living standard was lower. There were less protections against, crooks and bad people and swindlers and all that kind of thing. No police department, no fire department, that kind of. So that when you think about the good old days, oh yeah, not always so good. So, like I say, it's about living in the present. I like thinking about the past some, but what am I doing now? What am I doing tomorrow? How am I? There was a quote I just saw from Anthony Hopkins, where he's kind of thinking about his life now at his age, the actor Anthony Hopkins. And I think he might have been quoting or paraphrasing somebody who said, I used to think I had two lives and now I know I have one, where you have more yesterdays than tomorrows. And it's true. So use them, use the days you have, and like use the lessons of the past to think about the past. Don't dwell on it. Well, like I say, nostalgia has its place, but I try not to get too nostalgic. When people kind of say, "Oh, remember that?" Yeah, it's and then sometimes they're recalling very good times. But I can, I can take that in small doses, but that's pretty much it. I don't like to go get big doses of that.
Right. Heard on.
Yes.
Yes. Well, Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is a blast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on this show. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. You jogged my memory about stuff that I had long since forgotten about. So
nice.
That's how Jake's time should do. Yeah, thank you so much for what you've done over the years, and I can what's next in store for you. And keep up great work of what you're doing now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and continued luck with your podcast.
Thank you so much, Dean. I'll let you know when this goes up.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, Dean.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Dean. Bye.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. And it's goodbye from us as well. We absolutely enjoyed our time talking with Dean Gordon. Keep on the lookout for more wonderful interviews coming your way. As always, what do we say, Jake?
Keep nostalgia alive. Take care, everyone. See you next time. Take care. Bye.
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 Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode. Be sure to follow Jake and the Happy Nostalgia team on social media, check out our website, and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.